We have 4 screws that hold the shutter assembly to the front plate. Let's get those done up. Right, all 4 are in position. I'll just check that the shutter cocks and fires correctly. That appears good, and tighten those screws up. Wasn't expecting any problems there, but you never know. Okay. Start with the rest of the stuff. So, what do we got? We've got a shim washer that goes against the on this post at the top. And then we have the cam that opens the blades to the viewing position. I'm going to take some molybdenum paste and run that round the edge here and into that slot. That's where it picks up and moves it. Put that in position over the pin, and it should be pretty much back against that pin at the top. There are 2 small pinions. One of them has a D-shaped hole in it, the other one has a little tab on the back. That tab couples to this little slot near the centre of this thing, so these 2 are coupled together. We have another shim washer, little wee one that goes on the front of that. I'm just going to give that a wipe of molybdenum paste if I can achieve it. Let's just do that here. It sits on there like that. That's held in place with this little bracket, and I put a wipe of molybdenum paste on the tip of that. That's held in place with a small, quite a short screw. The other pinion, that's got a D-shaped hole in it, and it couples to that shaft. And the ring should point upwards. We have this rack. I'm just going to give that rack a wipe with molybdenum paste on both faces. Very little. I mean, it's just like you'd hardly know I'd been there. And this fits in so that the first tooth here is in line with the centre line of this pinion, and the 5th tooth is in line with the tooth on the gear at the top here. Checking that's correctly positioned. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That looks right. That's right. Not that one. Oh yeah, that can go on. So that spacer washer goes on there, and spacer washer goes on there. this piece, this bracket, holds everything in place there. I'll give that a wipe with molybdenum paste through the centre. This is the bearing, if you like, for that pinion. It sits over there. It's held in place with 2 screws. Now just about everything's black inside this shutter, as you can see, but they use nickel plated screws in this position. I can only presume that they couldn't get this size of screw with a black finish, or didn't feel the need. It's not in the picture area. The mirror's going to be covering that when the picture's being taken, the capping plate, so it's not as though they are a bright reflective thing to cause a problem. It's just that they went to all the trouble to have all these other components black. You think they might have done the same for that. Now this gear is driven by the it's an idler. It goes between the shaft from the cocking rack and that curved rack and the flat rack in there. So I want to put a little bit of molybdenum paste through the centre of that, and some on both faces, won't hurt. Now one of these faces is dead flat and the other face is slightly recessed, so the teeth are back from the edge. The dead flat face, that goes back against the shutter body here. There's a recess all the way round there. So it's not needed on that face. This rack, this lever needs to go in. Now the tricky bit here is getting this plastic flash contact insulator in under here without breaking the thing off. So molybdenum paste on this thing. Well, it sits in this way up. This rack lifts it up. So I need some molybdenum paste on that little tab there where this rack's going to push underneath it. I'm putting some through the centre where this will move on this screw, and see if I can get this thing hooked in under here without any casualties. Yeah, okay, it went. Got to get this under those wires. And it's under a bit of tension. Get that centered up and get the screw down here. Now you've got to wriggle this about so that that lever is riding on the shoulder of the screw. It's not trapped underneath the shoulder, otherwise it will not move smoothly. In fact, it won't move at all and nothing will work. That looks complete. Now I want to check this and make sure that that cocks and fires. Fortunately, I have the cam complete from another camera that I can use for testing this, so I'll put that in place. We'll cock the shutter, release the shutter, that closes nicely, and when the capping plate comes up it will lift this and it allows that action to continue. So if I put some tension on that spring, we should see this action happen quite snappily. That's better. And that's the action of that spring there. That does that. Let's get that, do that again for you. I'll wind some tension on that spring and engage it. So that's all moving nicely. Check that that screw's tight. I need to solder this wire back down in position. And then we need to put this mirror buffer back in place. Put some black paint over that flash contact because that would be in the image area. That would reflect light if you left that shiny silver. And then it's ready to go on the camera. Well, time has passed. It's time to put these pieces together. As you can see, I've got my washers here, my spacer washers all there ready to put into the body. And I've got the shutter ready to go as well. So first I'll deal with these washers. Now, as I've said earlier, these washers have to be in, they're cup shaped basically, and they're set in opposition, so that instead of stacking them like spoons, they are set in opposition to give you maximum adjustment there. So I'll get these sorted out. So one convex and one concave, if you like, in each position. Of course, it's fun getting these washers in place without knocking them over. I just dropped one down in the body there. Now I've got to retrieve that. Alright, I'll find some other tweezers. These are the ones I'm looking for, very long. Now I've got to see if I can reach down into the body and retrieve that washer, if I can see where it fell. I can see it down in there. Otherwise, of course, I would have to tip the camera over, tip all the washers out and start stacking them up again, which would be no fun. Oh, I've done it again. Of course, I'm trying to retrieve something black from down in the dark depths, so you can't even see what you're doing half the time. Okay. These tweezers, not a bit of glue or something on the end of them, they're not picking things up cleanly. Alright, so all of those are sitting there in place, and I'm putting one in the top position, one on top in each position. Concave side up. Okay, so that's ready to go. That body's ready to have the shutter put into it. The meter drum is where we left it, undisturbed. And here's the shutter. Now, what we're trying to do is get the shutter in here so that the gear couples to this little idler here. Now, there's a bit of potential play there. That could be, you know, if it's over slightly one way or the other, there'll be a timing difference of perhaps a tooth. That looks pretty good there. It looks like there's not too much slack in it. But that's what you're trying to achieve. So you may find that you have to do this process a couple of times, you know, until you get it right, to get the timing correct. That's looking pretty good to me. There's not much slack there, so I'm going to try getting all this in. The arm here has to pass through this slot. The meter drum has to fall into this recess here. I haven't got the pinion running, the shaft running in here, so we're not trying to couple that. The shutter release lever here passes under the shutter release shaft here, and of course the gear has to drop into here. This can be done it can even go smoothly on occasion. So I'm lowering that in at the bottom, and that I just felt that drop. That means the meter drum dropped into place. Now we're absolutely dependent on not having disturbed those washers. So I'll just check the alignment of my washers, and I'm putting the two fixing screws very lightly in the bottom positions there. And at the top, you can see that the top of the camera is by no means settled back into the body. We're held up on the chrome trim here at the top. I'll pull that back with my screwdriver and I'll start lowering it down past there. Now I haven't moved it far. The next obstruction is the mirror. So leaning in with my screwdriver and pressing against the frame of the mirror, I depress the mirror slightly and continue lowering the front down. Now that's stopped at that point. I've got two longer screws here. These screws are the same screws as would hold the film advance lever on the base of the camera. And I'm popping those in place. I only ran it in about one thread. That's to hold those washers in position. Now I've heard of other ways of dealing with that. I've heard people suggest you can use toothpicks, you can do this, you can do that, you can do the other. But the screws are in place now, so the washers can't fall off. Basically they're not going to fall away. Now I can look inside the front of the camera and look at my curved cocking rack, the transfer shaft, and I gave it a slight nudge this way, and that pushed it in. And it allowed the front of the camera to drop down a bit closer. Just giving it a bit more of a nudge to see if that gear will engage. It's not looking particularly enthusiastic. The body's not down flush, it's not far away. It's sitting, the gears are sitting on top of each other, they're not meshed. Reaching in here, that rack, I'm just going to give that a nudge with the tip of my screwdriver. No, that hasn't moved anything. Alright, I'm going to try moving the film advance lever. First, press the shutter release button. Now holding the lock lever down, I'll just try moving the film advance lever, and you should hear them click in. Yeah, that was it. I hardly moved the film advance lever, the gear clicked in. Let's try cocking the shutter. My film advance lever will not complete. It means that I have too much, the coupling here effectively is too far advanced. You got to be careful. If I forced that, I'd get the film advance to complete, but it would break something. Typically it would break the teeth on that transfer shaft. So there I am, the timing of the gear between the front of the camera and this is not correct. If I press the film release button down, that allowed the film advance lever to come back to the rest position. If I press my shutter release in at this stage, I dare say the shutter will actually fire. We've got it set to something fast there. Let's set it down to 1 second, for example, and see if the shutter's cocked, but the timing's incorrect. So the shutter did cock, but we're one tooth out from where we need to be. Two options at this stage. The simplest option is to swear a bit, take the 4 screws back out, take the front off the camera and have another go. The second option, since it costs nothing, if it goes bad, I'll be no worse off. I'll just lift up that chrome trim slightly, lift the front of the camera forward very slightly, start moving the film advance, and hopefully the gear dropped to the next tooth. Why is that not releasing? Oh, it is. Okay, so it looks like I got away with that. Basically, I pulled the front of the camera back slightly, disengaging the gear, started moving the film advance, kept the pressure on the front, it dropped into the next tooth. There we have it. It seems to go. So at that stage, I'm just going to run these screws down lightly at the base of the camera. At the top here, I'll remove those long screws I put in there temporarily, being careful not to disturb anything so that the washers don't fall out. I'll put the proper screws back in place and run that very lightly down. The same on this side. Now those screws are only just done up lightly. Just checking the action of the film advance and the shutter release. They seem to work fine. Okay, so far so good. What do I want to do next? Right, that bracket can come out now that held the spring for the front of the transfer shaft. So I'll remove that single screw. Lift that bracket out. The front's not down tight. I've got to get the pinion in here that couples to the meter. And the reason I put it in at this stage is that once I tighten these screws down on the front, which I'll do to set the lens mount to film plane distance, once those screws are tightened down, it's very hard sometimes to get this to wriggle into place. Basically you're trying to pass it through here and into the meter drum at the bottom. At the moment we've got a certain amount of side to side wriggle room. Not much, but enough. So I'll get that pinion in place next. I'll give this a wipe with some molybdenum paste. I'm most interested in the end because that's where we've got to get it into the slot in that drum. Some on the shaft, so where it goes through the bearing. Now we left the slot in the drum pointing roughly to the 11 o'clock position. So if I start with it in about that orientation, pop it down there, keep some pressure on it, and rotate that pinion slightly with another screwdriver, it possibly will just drop in for me. There it did. Without any argument, it dropped into place. And we've got this little idler pinion here. I just ran some molybdenum paste through that. That drops in over there. Okay, that part's good. Now I've got to set my lens mount to film plane distance, and the part of the mount that we're trying to match or measure from is this brass piece here. That's the surface that we're interested in, and I'll be measuring it across there. I'll be trying to get a measurement sort of corner to corner so that my 4 adjustment screws are doing it, getting things adjusted for me, pulling it down to the right distance. Okay, that part, right, I better get onto it. Right, I'm going to just screw these screws up here a little bit to get me started. I know from experience that I'm going to want the front plate here to be slightly higher than the body, but not much. possibly somewhere about there. These will not all be even. Some of those cupped washers, a couple of them are quite flattened out. I tried to make sure that each position got an even quota of washers. And it's probably worth noting here that we can also compensate to some extent for any damage that the camera's had. If these cameras get dropped on their nose, that can damage a lens and that can be quite visible. But of course people can put another lens on the camera if they've damaged a lens, and then you'd be none the wiser. But what can happen is that this front plate here can bend, and sometimes you'll see it in really bad cases where it's pushed right in, and instead of being a straight line across the front, it's pushed in like this. There's no reason to believe that's the case here, but being able to adjust the position relative to the film plane means that you can compensate for minor variation which may exist just because of manufacturing tolerances or because the camera has had a thump at some stage in its previous life. Right, setting up to do that. I'll get the gear and get it underway.